For me, because I do death education or death literacy work a lot, I start thinking of rather irreverent names that I would not share. Like it's not going to be the cover of my book, but mine is no bucket list. Don't plan for things 10 or 20 years from now. Start to think about how you're going to reach into that today. I think it gets down to the moment also, Hurratul, which is that if I'm in the middle of an argument, and I'm as feisty as the next person. The reality is I will often, not always, but often check myself and say, is this the person that I want to be right now? Is this how I want to live right now? I'm going to borrow from Jackie Kelm, who has written a wonderful book on appreciative living, and say that imagine that you're sitting in the theater, you're looking at the stage, and there are curtains. And we could just open one side of the curtain and look at what's negative and what's going wrong. Or we could open just the other side and look at everything's great. I don't have to worry about a thing. I'm really just not going to pay attention to any of that. The reality is we have to look at all of it. We have to see everything.
Dr. Jill Greenbaum is a Buddhist chaplain, spiritual companion, end-of-life literacy advocate, graphic facilitator, certified Appreciative Inquiry facilitator and coach, a trainer, self-care specialist, certified Zentangle teacher, and certified breathwork trainer. She holds a doctorate in curriculum development from the Teachers College, Columbia University. Jill began her career as a teacher, principal, and administrator working with students in special education settings in New York City. She completed her chaplaincy training at the Upaya Zen Center, studied trauma-informed curriculum development at the Bartol Foundation, and is currently working on her certificate in art-assisted grief therapy at the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition. Developing programs, speaking at conferences, writing articles, and creating zines are the ways in which Jill shares her expertise and experience. Most recently, she facilitated her program, Create Your Own Visual Obituary, for both the Lifting the Lid International Festival of Death and Dying and at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. She will soon launch her program, Living Well, Dying Well. Jill is an artist and craftsperson. She loves to travel around the world, paint, cook, bake, sew, and knit. She reads nonfiction and loves going to the museums. She's a lifelong New Yorker. On today's show, I welcome Jill Greenbaum to share her life journey with us. Hi, my name is Hurratul Maleka Taj, and I am your host for the podcast, The Unstoppables with Hurratul. This podcast brings to you stories of bold and resilient individuals who faced storms in their life, both personal and professional, but did not stop, did not give up. So let us together get on this journey to explore what made them truly unstoppable. Welcome everyone to today's podcast, and on today's show we have Jill Greenbaum with us, and I met her at Stanford GSB at Me to We 2024, and Jill is somebody who is full of positivity, and you really have to take her class to understand what I'm talking about, because of all the classes that we did in those 3 days at Stanford GSB, everyone who's watching from my batch would agree that Jill's class it clearly stood out. And that was because we were drawing and we were, expressing, and we were kind of sharing our dreams and ideas. And if I remember it correctly, Jill, the class was named Design the Life You Desire, right?
So yes, it was.
And I think that your class was the only class which was completely full. And I think there was like a queue outside the class where
it was challenging.
People wanted to get in. Yeah, people wanted to get in. And I still remember I met Chandni in your class, and then she went on to become a really good friend just because we were doing the partner activity together.
Mm-hmm.
So just imagine the impact of taking a class like that, where you actually not just learn something, but find new friends.
Oh,
So
it
thank you
warms my
so much.
heart to hear you say that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was such a beautiful experience. And I feel so privileged that
Mhm.
today I'm here with you, talking to you about a lot more. Thank you so much for taking out this time.
Of
Um,
course.
and so, diving right into it, my first question to you is, to you, if when you hear the word unstoppable, what does it mean?
Mhm. It's such a big word. It encompasses so much. To me, it means envisioning what's possible and working towards it.
Hmm.
And so, and that applies to everything. So it's your work, it's your personal life, it's how you approach life in general. And so it's taking a complete view of life and choosing where to focus so that you're able to make the kind of progress and change that you want.
Right. And so, in your own life, when you hear the word unstoppable or the podcast name, The Unstoppables, do you
Mhm.
recall any incident or anything specific that comes to your mind reflecting back? Um, yeah.
Oh gosh, absolutely. I mean, I can think of something that just happened, but in the life of an entrepreneur, it happens
Yeah.
all the time. But
Yes.
like, um, quick story, and it is that I was ready to host a death cafe, which is a place where people can come to talk about their questions and their thoughts and their feelings. It's not therapy, it's not a bereavement group, it's just a space to normalize talking about dying and death. And it was my third session where I was trying to offer it in person near my home in my hometown. And the first two times, no one showed up. And the third time, I was packing up my things because someone hadn't come, and it was 15 minutes into the hour and a half. And as I'm getting ready to leave, a woman comes and I can tell that she's looking for something. And so I say, "Are you here for the Death Cafe?" And she says, "Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I'm late." I said, "No worries. This is wonderful." And she said, "Am I the only one?" I said, "Well, I know someone else was going to come and they had a conflict. Come in, we'll talk. We'll have tea, we'll have cake." And that's exactly what we did. And we spent the next hour and 15 minutes sharing together. And so for me, the unstoppable piece is I could have stopped after the first time or after the second time. I
Right.
even texted my family the third time and said, "No one's shown up." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And I thought to myself, yes, I'm somewhat disappointed. And yet I know what a hard topic this is. I know it takes time for people to get used to the idea of talking about it, and they have other things going on in their lives. I'm going to continue to do this. And now I absolutely will, because this woman came, another woman wrote me afterwards, and a man said he wanted to come the next time. And when is it? So it is sticking with it, being persistent.
Wow. While you were explaining all of that, one of the things that I want to tell the audience who's watching and listening is that Jill has had such a different path to the usual mainstream that people actually go for. And when this is precisely what excites me the most, and when she's talking about the cafe, it brings me to the topic that Jill does end of life work with people, and that is such an I wouldn't say tough, but it is so different. People usually do not want to talk about death. It is scary. It brings mixed emotions.
Mhm.
It is full of for some people, trauma also when they
Mhm.
lose their family members. And
Of
so,
course.
I would love you to kind of take us through the end of life work you do.
Sure.
Um, and how that kind of builds that, how do I say it, how that brings you know a reflection in people that awareness that we're not going to be here forever
Mhm.
um, can help them do things which they postpone forever.
Mm.
So yeah.
Gosh, um, it's a challenging topic to even begin to talk about, like how did it start and how did I get there and all of that. And we can leave that for later on if you like. But the reality is, this is something that will happen to all of us. It is
Right.
a part, life and death are inseparable. We plan
Yeah.
for so many transitions. And I think in creating a bigger context for the conversation, we're not just talking about dying and death, and most people fear the dying more than the death and the suffering. We are talking about all the transitions that you go through in your life that have some challenge, whether it's birth or schooling, whether it's developing a partnership, a marriage, a family. All of these things take time, effort, and energy, and we spend our time planning for that. And we are also, of course, in everything influenced by previous experiences. And so while we're not going to get into it here, one of the things I think about often is, what are people's previous experiences with dying and death? How were they raised? What is the culture and how do they talk about it? And how easy is it to do that? And so I'm trying repeatedly in different ways to help people talk about these very difficult things, because they don't have to be. They can be as natural as sitting down with coffee and tea and just talking about what's in your heart. What are your concerns? What are your hopes? And I tend to, because Appreciative Inquiry, as we saw, of course, at the GSB, it's really where I live. And it's, what do you hope for? What are you dreaming into? What would you like your end of life to be? And to a person, people say, I want to, at least psychologically, if not practically, be prepared for it. And I want to spare my loved ones any discomfort or confusion around what I want. And so I come at this from a values perspective. What's important to you? How do you live out your values? How will they show up at your end of life? And part of it is making sure that you've prepared yourself and your family and your friends, close friends, to support you. So there's no confusion.
Right. And so, Jill, how do you see people who live with that awareness of uh, this fact that we have to die and we will, for certain, death is certain, nothing else is, versus people who live in ignorance and they would probably never talk about it? What difference do you see between the two, and what kind of I would say, inner resilience or the unstoppable spirit that we're talking about, do you see in people who kind of realize and become aware of it versus those who kind of live postponing everything they do to tomorrow?
It's a really big question. And I think there are any number of reasons that people won't approach thinking about, quite frankly, the end of their lives. Number one, as we haven't talked about yet, but I am Buddhist in orientation, in philosophical and practical orientation. And so for me, living in this moment, not dwelling on the past and not in a negative or ruminating way, or not imagining fear into the future, is very important and helpful. All right, so there is that. There's also, once again, to fall back on appreciative inquiry, what are people's foundation? What skills do they think they have? A lot of people think they can't handle it. Oh, and then they realize you've done other big, brave, hard things in your life, right? You have suffered in various ways. You've been the victim of, here in the United States, fires or hurricanes, or around the world, mudslides and typhoons. You have done hard things. You may not recognize that you got through them. You might have had help from other people, and all of that is okay. And recognizing what your foundation is, so you feel that I can take this on if I have the support that I need, if I have others around me, maybe just one or two, that will talk with me about this process. And I think that's very true for entrepreneurs, right? In the work that we do in building our businesses, right?
Right.
So we do hard things. We go against the odds. We fail, and we fail forward, right?
Yeah.
So we learn from every experience. And so it's finding and creating the circle around us of people that can support us and the resources that are out there. In this day and age with the internet, there is so much access to information and to support. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And it can be overwhelming, right? It can be very overwhelming. And so it helps to have people that are guides, which is what I consider myself, helping people find the resources that are the best fit for them, knowing where to look and what to look for, and having them do the work, though, right? Because you need to do your own work.
Yeah. Do you recall any of your students or mentees who you kind of guided for end of life work, and you see some something so remarkably different before and after
Mhm.
they actually did that work with you? And what changed?
And so I would say I'm part of a small group of women in North America. Of course, we're always happy to expand,
Right,
but we are all visual practitioners. So we are all either graphic recorders or graphic facilitators. We listen to what people say, and then we use visuals, hand drawing images and text, paper and markers, iPads and pencils, that kind of thing. And so we came together during the pandemic, having
right,
listened to a colleague speak about work she was doing in Thailand with patients in a hospital that needed to better communicate with doctors. Those of us here in North America, the few that came together, we had an interest in end of life work. And we thought, can we help people better prepare for end of life by listening to their wishes, hopes, and dreams? Can we guide them in this process? And so we started doing that as a group. It's something I do on my own now. And it is a process, though, Hurratul. And it's important to know that
right,
I prepare people in advance by sending an email, by having conversations. These are some questions I'd like to ask you. Then we get together, usually online, guide them through a series of questions to imagine what quality of life is to them and how
right,
they want to live their final days. And then I draw it. And after 45 minutes to an hour, their feeling is, I'm so heard, I'm understood, and I can take what has been created, this physical artifact, and show it to my family and friends to begin to talk about what's important to me. And they feel a sense of peace. And they feel a sense of, I'm creating a plan for myself and helping my loved ones at the same time.
right. And is that what you do with people who are approaching like their old age, or is it also what you do with, you know, across ages, like people across ages?
Absolutely. That is such a great question, because the assumption is that, oh, you're working with people near end of life in their
Yeah,
70s and their 80s and they're sick. And that is
yeah,
absolutely not the case. It is primarily women
right.
who, at least in America, bear the brunt of handling family matters, even if they're working 9 to 5 or longer, right?
Yeah,
They're still very much responsible in many respects for handling family issues. And
right.
so these are women in their 50s and 60s for the most part that know they
Okay,
need to think ahead for themselves, for their families, maybe
right.
for their parents. And I will say, because I have in the past couple of years opened up to a whole new network of people that I've met, primarily women in their 30s and 40s that lost their parents at a young age, that are
Hmm.
interested in thinking about, what will I put in place for myself and my family? So
Hmm.
it is healthy people that span the spectrum, mostly from mid 30s to their 60s, that are planning ahead, because we know, if we think about it, we all know in our bones nothing is given. We are
Yeah.
here now.
Oh yes, of course. Yes. And we sometimes take life for like so much, so many things for granted, right? Like
Yes.
everything around us, right? And then
Yeah.
I still remember the time I was preparing for this podcast, and I was reflecting on the end of life work, and the
Mm,
topic itself. I was thinking to myself, nothing is a surety, not even the next moment. I
right.
mean, I am here right now. We do not know the next day is there
Mhm.
or it is not there, right? And so
Right.
that brings so much of, um, I don't know if the word is acceptance or
Mm,
fear, because at
mhm.
first, when you think about it, both, it's a mixed feeling, right? So how do
Right.
people react when they actually think about doing this work with you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I do volunteer work in some organizations that are working with end of life issues. And one of the ways I contribute my services is to fundraise by offering to listen to people's stories, and people donate to the organization.
Okay.
And so I did
Okay.
this with an organization in my state, and someone signed up, and she's like, I'm looking forward to this. And I said, terrific, let's get it on the calendar and do it. I never heard from her again. And I
Oh
reached
my God.
out several weeks
Hmm.
later, and I never
Hmm.
heard from her again. And so, I mean, the goal was to raise money for the organization. And so that was certainly achieved. My
Yeah.
concern is that we didn't even have a conversation to begin to
Right.
talk through what might have come up as some of her worries and fears.
Right. And so you think that people are sometimes so scared to not even go that path at all?
I think that's part of it. I think also they don't realize how resilient they are because they get worried, right? And when we're worried, we shut down and we don't remember those things. I think also sometimes if you start to talk to your network of people around this, they're not always supportive. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, I have a friend, she's in the field, and her husband won't talk about dying and death with her.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Like even with friends my age, if you're talking about somebody who's sick and dying, they'll be like, talk something else,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Can't we talk about something else? Can't we talk about
Yeah.
something more pleasant, which is really the name of
Ex-
a graphic memoir? Yes. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And for me, because I do death education or death literacy work a
Yeah.
lot, I start thinking of rather irreverent names that I would not share. Like it's not going to be the cover of my book,
Yeah.
but mine is no bucket list. Don't plan for things 10 or 20 years from now. Start to think about how you're going to reach into that today.
Right. Right.
And that's not from a place of fear. It's just from a reality check.
So important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it gets down to the moment also, Hurratul, which is that if I'm in the middle of an argument and I'm as feisty as the next person, the reality is I will often, not always, but often check myself and say, is this the person that I want to be right now? Is this how I want to live right now?
Beautiful.
And and it doesn't make it necessarily easy to change my behavior, and yet it's a wake-up call right then and there. Like, what can I say to change the dynamic of this? Because, and I'm only half the equation or part of a larger conversation, but I can only be responsible for myself. And
Right.
so how will I do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the work you do is so I think deep in terms that it makes you reflect, makes you more
Mhm.
aware, and aware not of the lie or not what you want just while when you die, but also of the present moment and how you
Absolutely.
live and how
Mhm.
you behave with others and how you interact with your surroundings and what you do each moment and how it counts to the larger picture, right? So um, yeah, that brings me to another topic, Jill, that really intrigued me in the online class that I took with you, and that is AI. And this
Yes.
AI is a lot different than the AI we hear all the time, which is
Right.
artificial intelligence. This is not that. Tell us something about AI, Jill, and how you use AI and the framework around it,
Mm-hmm.
and how it is life changing. It has certainly changed my life. I can vouch for it. Taking that one class with you was definitely life changing for me. And I would love you to share with the audience a little bit of those frameworks and how we, what is AI so that they can also benefit
Absolutely.
from it. Yeah.
Absolutely. My pleasure, because I love talking about this. And what's exciting to me is to hear you talk about not just learning it, but living it, or what we would call being AI or
Right.
being appreciative inquiry. And so, what it is, in answer to your question, is it is a generative and practical process model for approaching change. And it was developed by a David Cooper writer years ago. And it can be changed within an organization, it can be changed within ourselves as people. And
Yeah.
so there are the 5 Ds that we talk about in appreciative inquiry, which is defining what question or what topic you're addressing, and then discovering what your foundation is, which is what we talked about before. Whose shoulders are you standing on? What do you know already? What have you done that will support you in making change?
Right.
We then go into dreaming, and that is really blue sky thinking, as large as we can think, no holds bars. And we just put it all out there. And for me, of course, I'm drawing it or I'm writing it or something like that, but it can be done any number of ways, of course. And then we get into designing for the future. And so we look at what is possible and we literally create the steps. All right. And it becomes an iterative process, because just because we design it once doesn't mean it's going to come together. right? It
Right.
means you need to check in. What are your milestones? How are you doing? What adjustments do you need to make? Will you course correct? So that ultimately you come to the point where you are creating and you are delivering on what you have created. And I will say, because I've had a couple of instances, and I don't want to sound ever like pie in the sky, so to speak, like, oh, this is all fabulous and there are no challenges. There are absolutely challenges. But may I share a quick story about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Please go ahead. Yes.
Sure. So there is a wonderful journal out there, speaking of things, called Appreciative Inquiry Practitioner, AI Practitioner. And
Okay.
so I wrote an article for it based on an experience I had. I am part of a choir called the Threshold Choir that sings at the
Okay.
bedside of people that are very ill and dying. All right.
Oh.
So and it's sing a cappella. so so this is a group that gets together, and they're all over the world actually, and have been around for a number of years. And so I found that in entering a new group, being a facilitator and very into, let's put it that way, the way groups function, at one point I was like, gosh, I think some things could go more smoothly. And so I offered to host a meeting and facilitate a meeting. And I didn't say what model I was using, but I,
Okay.
I used appreciative inquiry to do the
Hmm.
hour-long session. And I created a visual so everyone could see what we were doing. And it was a visual agenda. And we talked about, why do we do this? And what's our foundation? How are we
Hmm.
coming to it? What do we want it to be for ourselves and for the people that we're with? How will we actually do that? What will our design be? And how are we going to make sure that it happens? All right. And so that is using appreciative inquiry without using the language of it or scaring off anybody or making it feel big or academic or anything like that. And so
Yeah.
we did that. We came together. It was a beautiful session. And that's what's written about in the article. And we started down a path of creating the change that we all wanted. And then, truth be told, we are a volunteer organization. Sometimes we don't have enough people to sing every month because you have to have a core group. We sing in 3-part harmony. So sometimes you have to have enough people, and it doesn't always come together. And so, because we had not put all the structures in place, or they didn't work as we intended, and we didn't
Hmm.
check back in, it started to fall apart again. From my
Oh.
perspective, perhaps not from anyone else's. But the reality is, it became so clear to me, as it is to all of us in this work as entrepreneurs, that we must put the structures in place to support the work that we're doing. We can't just make
Yeah.
the change and assume because of good intentions, everybody's got enough time and it's all going to come together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and that's me being very real, right? I think it's a fabulous model. How do we actually make it work in real life over time?
Yeah, I think theory to action and action with a structure is
Yeah,
perhaps the way to go about
yeah,
it. But um, so Jill, I think I have used AI in probably every aspect of my life, but
awesome.
I really want you to tell the audience, for example, if somebody is facing a challenge, let's say, and you taught us in Stanford GSB class that whenever you are facing a problem, the
Mhm.
words that you use, not calling it as a failure or a problem, rather calling it as a challenge, an opportunity, it makes such a huge difference to the way you see the problem. And perhaps this is the very reason that some people build so much resilience. They're
Uh-huh.
unstoppable, versus some people who would probably pause and they will not want to go ahead because the self talk that they do with themselves is
Right.
so powerful in a way
Mhm.
that it can take you to places and make you do great things, or it can
Mhm.
completely destroy you, or make you completely paralyzed, right?
Mhm.
So for students and for professionals and for people of all ages who are listening to you right now,
Mhm.
if you could tell them 4 or 5 questions from AI that they should always ask themselves whenever they're
Mhm.
facing a challenge, and what should they visualize that would help them to probably, calm down and take better decisions, or not
Sure.
stop and kind of, not get paralyzed.
Absolutely. And so the questions will probably be wrapped into a process.
Okay.
And so first, it would be thinking about, where are you right now? So where are
Okay.
you right now? How are you feeling? What
Perfect.
are your values? What are you standing on? What's your foundation? How are you coming to this? That would be a piece of it. And then looking at everything, because we know, as we talked about in the session, that our minds protects us, our brains protect us, right? We are always looking out for what's dangerous. And while it might
Right.
be not be lions and tigers at this point in time, there are definitely threats that are real and are felt within us. And so
Yes.
if the threat is, I had a huge blow up, or my project is falling apart, or my finances are falling through, the reality is, yes, that's happening. What is everything that's happening? And so I'm going to borrow from Jackie Kelm, who has written a wonderful book on appreciative living, and say that imagine that you're sitting in a theater, you're looking at the stage, and there are curtains. And we could just open one side of the curtain and look at what's negative and what's going wrong. Or we could open just the other side and look at everything's great. I don't have to worry about a thing. I'm really just not going to pay attention to any of that. The reality is we have to look at all of it. We have to see everything. And we have to get real about that. And then we have to choose, actively choose. And this is not easy. Saying the words are easy, doing it is harder, but find allies maybe that can help us to focus on the positive. What do I have already? What can I pull together to make these things start to happen? And so it is a matter of really training our minds to start to look at what's possible.
Right.
And so using language is very important, understanding how we're coming to this and catching ourselves, right? And reaching out for support when we need it. And by support, I don't mean helping, because that could be assuming that someone's weak, or fixing, because that means someone's broken, but working with someone that can serve you, that can meet you where you're at, listen to you if that's all you need, or point you in the direction of some resources. And so there are any number of ways in which people can serve other people. And so we need to look at
Yeah.
it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And so are you somebody who would also, for all the, so many years of practice that you've done, whenever you're stuck, there is a loop sometimes that we overthink things,
Mm,
right? And especially in your class, I think when I came to meet you, I was going through a lot of overthinking in different
mm,
directions regarding my
mhm.
career, regarding some of the personal issues. But when you actually put it down on the paper and when you draw it,
Right.
it actually, it changes something. And I don't know what
Absolutely.
it is, but maybe you could put some, yeah,
Context.
yeah,
Absolutely. And so it makes me think that one of the things we talk about in appreciative inquiry is that as soon as you ask the question, you start
right.
to think about it differently. Right. And so
Yes.
we change the trajectory of what we're doing. So, what kinds of questions do we want to be asking ourselves? Do we want to ask ones that are negative, that set an intention heading down a road we don't want to go?
Right.
Or do we want to set a positive intention, as in what's possible here? So,
Yeah.
quick example, once again, this has happened to me in real life in groups where someone will start a meeting and they're facilitating and they're saying, okay, let's just check in with everybody and see how they're coming to the meeting. And I'm like, oh no, because some people are going to be coming to it great. Other people are going to be, I'm not even sure why I'm here. And other people are going to be, this just happened and I don't know how I'm going to maintain my focus. And so for me, and my question's going to be, what's the best thing that's happened to you today? Because I'm going to set a different trajectory with you. And it doesn't make you forget the other things, but it means your focus is right here, right now, on
Right.
what's working and how we're going to move forward with that. And it doesn't mean you don't need to take another meeting or have some kind of conversation with someone about what's not working, but that's not now.
Right.
So, literally, this afternoon, I'm starting a book group for a book called A Year to Live by Stephen Levine. And it
Right.
has you imagine you have 1 year left to live.
Wow. Oh my
To act
goodness.
as if you have 1 year left. And it's our first meeting.
Hmm.
And one of my colleagues, a couple of colleagues are coming, a few people I don't know because I put it up on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And so the reality is, he's like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to talk about this? Which is a very reasonable question. And I
Yeah.
was like, you know what? I'm going to loosely facilitate it. We're going to do an opening, but the opening is going to be around, what do we want to gain from being here? We're not going to start with your worries and fears. We'll talk about them, but
Yeah.
that's not the place we're beginning.
Right. So in that, so do you think that when you say that we have to take the whole picture into account, first open the curtain that shows the positive side, so you begin to look at the positives and be grateful for what you
Mhm.
have, and then open the negative and give yourself a reality check and say, okay, these are the things that are not right, and
Uh-huh.
maybe we're going to work towards it. Is that what is
So
that the right direction
I
of
love
taking
I
it?
love that question because I'm going to do both and to answer it. I'm going to
Okay.
say my way would be to start with the positive because I feel better to look at the things that are challenging
Right.
if I've done the positive first, if I've really explored that. I will tell you that from listening to Daniel Pink, who's, one of my favorite podcasters, his research shows start with the negative and end on the positive. Now, the thing is, we're not ending with this process. So it's not like you're giving someone feedback, start with the negative, they walk out the door feeling great. This is more a process. And the question is, for me, not so much what's not working,
Yeah.
but how are we going to work with what's happening here?
Right.
Right. So
My
you're getting
God.
to the same place,
Yes.
but we're not going to do the 5 whys. We're not doing that. We're not drilling down to see how painful it can be to get to the
Right.
core of the problem, because when I'm at the bottom of that fifth why, I don't want to do
Yeah.
anything.
Right. Right.
So it's the questions that we ask are absolutely critical. And so that is
Yeah.
a big piece, whether it's of ourselves personally or in the work that we do.
My goodness, when you said that, when you asked it differently, it took me back to the class when we were talking about the challenges we had so differently. And when we were showing you the questions, the way you were asking and kind of reframing it
Mhm.
was so different. And just reframing it differently can change the whole context, and it can give you, it can basically change the whole narrative of the situation that you're kind of describing. So
Completely.
that is so powerful, Jill. And can we use AI, and the audience who's listening, can they use AI to also dive deep into doing a little bit of work, reflecting the way you do end of life work? Is that
Mm.
possible to ask yourself some questions that bring you that awareness and reflection to live more meaningfully and mindfully in the present
Absolutely.
moment?
Absolutely. And to me, I think we often talk, and I'll speak more of America now, meaning the US than other places. We often
Yeah.
talk about our values are so important to us. And yet if you ask people to name, your top 5 and how do they show up in your life, that's a big conversation, right? And
Yeah.
there's some hesitation there. And so I think part of it with appreciative inquiry is being aware of where are you coming from? What do you want your future to be? How do you live that every day? And
Yeah.
one of the things I love doing, because I love data, right?
Yeah.
So I love Laura Vanderkam's work. She studies time, and she'll talk about how many hours are there in a week and what are you doing with your time? There are 168.
Right.
And my question or my challenge to everybody that's listening is map a week of yours, or 2 if you've had one that's exceptional and very different, and look at how you're spending your time, because that is a reflection of your values. And do you want to be spending your time that way? And I'm not gonna, I could do, the very typical, well, how much are you on your phone and blah blah blah, but it's more than that. It's everything we do is a representation of our values. And sometimes there are things that we feel we have to do. It's a commitment to the family, it's a commitment to work,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with that. But knowing how much time, and is this the balance that you want in your life? And personally, I don't use the word balance, I use harmony, because I don't think that it's possible to balance. I think it's a futile task.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely think that we can approach our lives from an appreciative inquiry stance to see where we are, what we're doing, what we want to do, how we're going to make things different, checking in with ourselves. And then it's a reflection and action cycle that we never leave behind.
Interesting. Also, Jill, you also do a lot of Buddhist practices. And is there anything specific amongst those, and anything that changed your life and you'd want to share with everyone who's listening? Um,
Mm,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's such a rich topic. So I'm trying to, get down to the essence of it. And I would
Yeah.
say, of course, there are the basic foundational principles, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 16 Precepts. But I would say, for me, what I live with every day, because those are foundational, meaning they're your bedrock, right? And you should be absolutely in touch with them. What I find I'm very in touch with on a consistent basis is the three tenets, which are not knowing, meaning entering situations without preconceptions, going in
Okay.
without expectations.
Right.
And so not knowing to me is very important. Bearing witness, which is listening to what's going on around me, once again, without
Hmm.
putting myself into the mix. Like, what is going on here? And then, and this comes out of not only the Buddhism piece, but also the chaplaincy work I do, healing action. What can I contribute? And
Hmm.
so I find that I get tripped up. I have trouble when I start falling into expectations around myself or around other people's behaviors. And I should know what's going on with me. I don't always know what's going on with everyone else. And to put my
Right.
expectations on someone or my judgments based on things that I don't know and things they may not even be willing to tell me if they're aware of it, it doesn't serve me. And I would
Hmm.
say those are the things that are most important to me, that we exist in a world that has much suffering and we can do things to change that for ourselves and with others.
If I'm understanding it correctly, you emphasized on detachment, and then um, you know, analyzing things for what they are and not bringing in your own bias, kind of conditioning, or the way you approach or have approached things in the past because you have preconceived notions.
Absolutely. And I think also detachment, sometimes people think that means you're not engaged or you're not interested. It
Right,
is a lack of attachment to the outcome. It means I want to work towards something and
right.
I can't control everything. And that's a really hard, that's a really hard thing to learn for me and for
Absolutely.
many other people. So there's definitely that. So there is that lack. And it's once again easier said than done. It's absolutely not always like that. But it is that okay, I'm observing what's going on. And I would say you're right. I don't think of the word analytical, and yet I don't think it's wrong. I think that what I'm trying to do is develop an awareness as to what's coming up in me as I'm having this experience and how aware am I of that?
Right,
Because it's going to, if I'm not aware of it, it's likely to get in the way of what needs to happen in this conversation or in the project that's going on. So it is
right.
developing that awareness and the capacity to not say everything that's on my mind because that's sort of my style. And so it's being in control of who am I in and how am I in this interaction, and is this a person that I want to be?
Hmm. Right. So, Joe, before we go to the last block or the last section of the podcast, one question that I have is that what really inspired you to take a career which is so not mainstream?
Mm.
I'm so, every time I meet you, I'm so inspired. At the same time, I'm so inquisitive and curious that what would have made you to choose this?
Mm. Well, I have to go back a little ways if that's okay, and
Yes, for
just
sure. Yeah.
say that I've always done things that were a little different, and I think
Hmm.
it's because of the house I was raised in terms of being an independent thinker and having choice and being able to make my own choices, and that was foundational. But when I was 16 years old, I saw what we would call a special on TV, so a special program on TV about children with autism, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I want to do that. And so I went to college for psychology and discovered that while I went to a very good school, most of the professors there didn't seem really connected to what I wanted to do. And I'm going to stay away from any stereotypes as I'm talking about this. And
Right.
so I shifted my vision to education and ended up graduating with a degree in psychology and education. having worked with students with autism and deciding that was not the path I wanted to take. Right. So I tried it. And I thought, and I discovered that I wanted to work with children that had what we used to call back then emotional handicaps and learning disabilities, who were very in your face, who really needed your engagement in a very active way. And I love that. So that's sort of a path not taken. And when I say that, once again, very US centric, as a special education teacher, in the late 70s and early 80s, there were not sufficient materials in most places for students. And so you really had to work hard to make it all come together and to work with the kids that you had and the lack of materials. And so you were always sort of on the edge. And at the same time in college, I also, I saw a sign in a window my freshman year walking downtown in Worcester, Massachusetts, and it said, rape victims need your help. And I thought, gosh, no one's ever talked to me about that as a high school student. And that sounds important. I should do that. So I started doing that. And I can tell you that at Thanksgiving that year, when I talked about how I was volunteering at the local rape crisis center, one of my relatives said, literally, can't we talk about something different? That's so unpleasant.
Right.
And so to me, this is my trajectory of doing things that are always a little different or a little on the edge.
Right.
And so, and, you know, I continued to do work in volunteer in rape crisis centers. Then to work, I became the first director of the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We would go into court in t-shirts and protest things. I mean, we did all kinds of stuff back in the day. And then I decided that I wanted to work more on my own and my trajectory and started my own work. And part of that work brought me to Singapore in 2015. And I was there to train people for an international training company. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to see so many temples and I'm going to be learning so much about Buddhism and I don't know anything. I should find out. And so I read Karen Armstrong's book, Buddha, and I thought, gosh, this really resonates with me. And so I did, as many people do, tried to find the right spot for me. Was it Tibetan Buddhism? Was it following Shambhala? Was it any number of things, following Thich Nhat Hanh? And now I am at the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. And that brought me to thinking more about living and dying through a course called Living Fearlessly. And it really resonated for me. And I thought, this is, once again, really important work that people don't like to talk about. And that's hard. And I can bring my skills as someone who learns things and turns them into training programs, someone who draws, someone who's capable of holding space for hard conversations. And so that's what brought me there. And I had never thought of becoming a chaplain or a spiritual companion. And yet I was, and I did work in a hospital during COVID with patients. And so all of these things came together. And it's something here in the US, once again, most people don't know what a chaplain is. They assume that you belong to a church or a temple or something like that. It's like, no, that's not us. We have our own beliefs, but we're always about who's the person in front of us and what do they need and how can we be helpful and supportive. And so I think it's really, I mean, the thread that I'm seeking to convey is that I've always been a little on the edge and interested in things that are hard for people to talk about because I seem to have that capacity.
Well, you know, listening to you, I feel like we live in a bubble. Like we means I and people like me, because I feel like, you know, most of our lives go into, okay, the mainstream paths. I'll be a lawyer, engineer, doctor, etc., etc. And I don't think so by even 30 or 35, people usually even think about rape victims or children suffering with disabilities, or having that heart to kind of even think about it, forget about going and doing something for it. I mean, I'm talking about the general, of course, there are people who are doing a lot of, you know, in that direction, but I'm just saying the mainstream, the how we are taught in schools and colleges is not very, like you said, on the dinner table, she said, can we not talk something pleasant? So it is not very much celebrated to kind of go into these fields and help and also embrace that part of the world, which is also, you know, in the ecosystem and in the world we live in, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so the reality is that these things are so common. I'm not going to sit here and cite statistics. People could find them out, but it is astonishing the number of people that are affected by just the few things that I have mentioned, but they are born by themselves for the most part, or in their immediate family, who don't necessarily have the skills, because why should they, right? It's not their line of work. But the reality is that we live in very, very much in bubbles, right? We don't share the things that are hard. We don't know the resources. I mean, literally, I was responding to a colleague of mine on Facebook this morning who was talking about a friend of hers who needed support because she was leaving her abusive partner. And so I private messaged her. Other people were, publicly doing it, which was great. They were providing resources, but I'm like, look, let's get on Zoom and do this together. I will help you find things. I don't know stuff in your neck of the woods, but we will find it together for your friend. And so that's the kind of thing, being open to the possibility of hearing what's hard. And no, you don't have to take it on. You don't have to suffer like other people. You need to be there and bear witness for folks.
Yeah, that's so important. So Jill, the last section of the podcast, two very important questions. The first one is, what is the new work that you're doing right now, which is exciting and which I and everyone should know about?
Well,
teaser.
teaser. So the new work that I'm doing that's so exciting to me is really getting out in the world and talking with people about death and dying, grieving and loss, which seems easier for people to talk about. And I've created a course in which people can, which will launch in February, a course in which people can assess where they're at right now. It literally follows the appreciative inquiry model without me talking about it. But what do you know already about where you are in your thinking and in your preparations? What do you need to learn more about? Do you even know what exists? In the US, depending on what state you are, you have different types of rights and privileges with regard to end of life care. Do you even know what your options are? Will you do as I did when my mother died? Will you do what she wished because that's what she knew? When my father died, somewhat different, and I did it differently because he wasn't able to participate in the final plans for it. And so I changed the paradigm completely for my family because I started to know a little bit about what was possible. So do you know what's possible and what do you want to make happen? And so it's not doing the work for people, it's being that guide on the side. It's being someone that knows about resources so people can do their own work and feel the strength in gaining it, so that they can have the conversations with their family and friends. And so making this, as we would say in the field, more death positive, meaning able to talk about this important part of our lives that will happen to every one of us.
Right. And is there any sort of age limitation to who could take it or who could not? Anybody can take it. Above
Anyone
18?
can, I would say over 18,
Over 18,
for sure. Yeah, I would say over 18. And there needs to be someone that can be a little tech savvy with you because we're on Zoom. And I will offer other kinds of opportunities like a collaborative online space, a Miro board, but it's not necessary. You need to have access to Zoom, whether it's on your phone, iPad, or computer, and you will be given resources and materials, and you're going to want to do your own research. And so it's really just having some comfort level in meeting with other people to talk about questions and concerns, but deciding how much you want to share, right? Because this is so deeply personal.
Yeah. Coming to the last question, Jill, what is the one message that you would like to give to everybody who is watching you today, listening to you, and especially to those who are going through some kind of really grave challenge or challenges?
They're related, but I'm going to say two different things. One is live every day and think about that every day. And so that may mean finding, looking for awe as you go throughout your day, walking in nature and beauty, being with others, whatever that happens to be. It might be developing a gratitude practice. It might be making sure that you have time for your own quiet and creativity, in addition to all the things that you need to do. And then I would say, know, even though you may not feel it, know that there are people out there that are willing to help. And if someone, the first person, the second, or the third doesn't resonate in the way that you want, that doesn't mean that you won't find someone along the way. And so there are lots of resources out there which you don't know of until you need them. And then it can feel overwhelming to look for them. But they do exist in many places. And particularly through the internet, there are so many opportunities now.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. This was such an enriching talk with you. Is there anything else that you would like to say as a concluding remark before we say, yeah?
I think the only piece would be also that take the opportunity to consider what's working in your life and use that as the foundation for going forward, and be AI or live appreciatively. There are resources for that too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jill. And to everyone who's watching, I would highly recommend everyone who's watching this episode today to once take appreciative inquiry and learn what it is. And yeah, if you take it with Jill, it is a plus plus. It is a cherry on the cake, because I have taken it personally from, I've taken two classes, right? One at the GSB where we did a little bit of it, and then an online class, and
Yes.
it changed so many things in me. Every time I am in a challenge or I am struggling, I would like to ask myself things that I used to probably ask differently. Today, when I structure it differently, the whole narrative changes, and it helps me immensely. And I think I've many times messaged you that how much it has impacted me in of course positive ways. Thank you so much, Jill, for doing this, and I'm so, so lucky to have you on this show. Thank
I
you.
am so delighted to have been here. I really appreciate the depth and the engagement that you had with the topic, because I know it's not an easy one.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.